All right, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome on stage Managing Partner, Aurora Global Media Capital, Mr. Justin Demon. Head for Hollywood and Overseas Business, Reliance Entertainment, Mr. Drew Senior. Managing Director, NBC Universal International Television, Ms. Christine Fellow. And the session lead, co-investor and CEO, Vector Media, Mr. Krishnan Rajagopalan.
Good afternoon, everyone. The past few years has seen sort of a remarkable transformation in the content ecosystem in Asia. Right? The market opportunity is huge and interesting and varied, and it's fueled by a number of different factors. Right? First, you have sort of a large growing demographic and sort of the economic output. GDPs are growing, so ARPUs are growing, the middle class is growing. Two, you have sort of a proliferation of the internet and smartphones, and consumers are spending more content, consuming more content than ever before, across genres, across platforms. And so it's a very exciting time to be in the content business in Asia. So we're here today to talk about some of the key opportunities in this ecosystem. And actually, what we have here is we're very lucky to have excellent panelists from some of the largest global, regional, and local studios, if you will, or broadcasters in Asia. Each of them brings a very different perspective to the table in terms of how they view the opportunities. And it'll be very interesting to see if some common themes emerge as we have the discussion sort of today. I'd like to start by having the panelists sort of briefly introduce themselves and their organizations, starting with Christine.
Thank you, Christian. Hello, Christine Fellows from NBC Universal Television Group. I oversee the Asia Pacific region in the branded services business. So we have traditionally our business has been television channels, but increasingly it is digital services, SVOD services. We have free-to-air and apps as well in the region. So anywhere that we're aggregating our content around brands.
Drew?
Hi, everyone. My name is Dhruv Sinha. I am from Reliance Entertainment India, and I take care of syndicating and distributing Indian content created by us, as well as acquired by us, and also getting into India the content that's made by our Hollywood partners, Amblin partners, and I am global, and I syndicate and distribute the same in Indian subcontinent. Thank you.
Justin Demon. In Aurora Media, we are producing an investment entity. We invest in all sorts of content and media and entertainment entities. So content implies anything from formats, films, TV, digital, anything with a strong IP component in there. In terms of companies, we look at everything from distribution companies, we look at everything from production companies, anything that services our need in the value chain as well. We're very much run like a VC, as you were, a content VC, in this sector of the media entertainment space.
Cool. Thanks, thanks everyone. So I think one of the things that often strikes me is, when you talk about Asia, it's really sort of extremely non-homogeneous. It's very differentiated. Each market is extremely different. There's a lot of variation in terms of demand, consumer demand for content across genres, across formats, television versus movies, as well as business models, right? AVOD versus free versus paid for, etc. Right? So the first part of the conversation, I'd like to focus on key opportunities from not from an organization perspective, but just from a broader ecosystem perspective. Where do you think are the key opportunities in Asia today in content? And I'd like to have maybe each one of your perspectives, because I actually think it's going to be quite different. It'll be interesting to see if there's any common threads here.
I'll start.
Sure.
I wear two hats most of the time. I'm both an investor and a producer, so a lot of the times I see things from both angles. For me, the biggest opportunity is looking at IP valuation, because I think in this part of the world, it's not at that level yet in terms of sophistication. So what we do is we work with producers on growing their IP. We work with producers on seeing how far their IP can grow, how far their content can grow, how far the reach can be. whether or not I start off from a very local perspective and start seeing whether it can go to a regional perspective, or do I just start from a regional perspective and see whether it goes to an international perspective, or do I go straight to international depending on the partners? It all comes down to how far do I look at the talent involved, what sort of brands are involved, what sort of IP is involved, what sort of budgets are involved. So for me, it all comes down to how do I put the best value on the table in order to get that valuation of the IP up within a few years' time. That's the main goal that I have in the next few years.
How do you balance sort of this idea of global IP or formats? And I know you do a lot of international co-productions versus projects potentially that are hyper local, so to speak.
Well, it's all honestly, when it comes down to it, it's all relative to the budget. So we get involved from projects that are less than 500,000 sometimes, all the way to projects that are around 15 million. It depends on what the relative market size of that project is going to be, what is the long tail of that project as well. When I say long tail, it also means what sort of IP we're getting and what sort of partnership we have in there. So, for example, if I get involved with a bigger project, I'm not going to work with local partners. I'm going to be looking at bringing the bigger studios from around the world to see how the structures are put in place for example, something like if I do a big TV format, I want to see whether NBC, for example, can I ride on their distribution system on certain parts of the world? And if I think I can straight away get the merchandising done for a certain region, maybe in South Asia, maybe I'll go to Reliance, for example. It's really all about putting that producing mindset into the investment methodology as well, and seeing how do I bring the best partnerships to the table and seeing how everybody can make something out of that. It's not, the big thing about in Asia right now is, as you guys would know, a lot of studios in some of the markets, they tend to hold on to everything from development to production to distribution, and that limits their ceiling as well. And sometimes what we've been seeing as well as being from this kind of investment space, we need to keep the deal flow as open as possible. And that means bringing as many partners to the table as possible, which means I work with multiple producers on a single project a lot of times as well. And that means that's, instead of looking at how do I grow an IP into into a certain valuation, how do I grow the pie bigger instead of everybody, how do I get everybody into a bigger slice? I just make the pie as big as I can.
Okay, so clearly you have sort of a portfolio approach to the problem, and I think you're looking at a lot of different kinds of approaches. So it's not a single import, global, local kind of. So where is the return, right? In terms of where are the hot opportunities, where do you see the best returns, and where do you believe as a business you need to be sort of really building for the future?
I think distribution in Southeast Asia is the biggest. It is the biggest challenge, and it's the biggest opportunity as well as I find, because there's not one strong distributor in Southeast Asia that knows a fragmented market like this, and that's something that we've been looking into and building a partnership base as well. So the other hat that I wear is that I run the Southeast Asian Audiovisual Association, which is a media investment and producing association. So through that, we bring together producers, distributors, and investors together into learning the value chain across the region. By doing that, we understand, we have the data points these days after having something like that with us. So after doing that sort of research over the last few years, right now we sort of understand that Southeast Asia isn't as fragmented as we think it is. It's just, you just need that one unifying force, and the distribution is the key thing.
So distribution, you think, is where the big gaps. Okay. Dhruv, turning to you.
I have a bit different perspective on this, because I'll just give you an example. One of the biggest thing that's viewed in India today, specifically the urban market, is a series on Netflix, which is Narcos. 80% of that content is in Spanish. And all we are doing is reading it in English subtitles. Same is for Fauda, which is an Israeli thing. There is Subura or something, which is again doing well, which is Italian mafia thing, which all of us are watching all that. What I'm very confident is, if we as India can come up with content which can transcend into any market. There is a potential. We look at these OTTs as more of a platform to launch content, Indian content worldwide. Which, if it can work, a Mexican drug lord thing can work in India. As a matter of fact, a lot of people who don't understand English in India are watching Game of Thrones. It is so huge, it's unbelievable.
So are you suggesting in some ways that global content is sort of importing global content or essentially lifting the quality of content that's locally produced to step up to global standards is where the action is?
Sure. That's where, plus, if we can synergize from what Justin is saying, if we find a good concept and it requires some technical help from India, or content is good here and technical help required from probably Hong Kong or Singapore or wherever, we can synergize all that and make much competitive content, if that may be.
That's interesting. And Christine, I think you have one of the broadest portfolios and certainly one of the largest media giants in the world. I'd love to hear what your thoughts on where the big opportunities are here in Asia.
Yeah, I mean, we see enormous opportunity in Asia. I think everyone would agree this is an incredibly transformational time in our industry. And that does certainly open competitive threats. It creates disruption in the traditional business sense. But for a company like us, it offers just extraordinary opportunity. We take a portfolio approach, and very much, we were talking earlier on your go-to-market strategy. We really look at markets, individually, and the go-to-market strategy is often a little different by market, depending on the development of market and the legacy businesses and return on investment forecasts. But there is no doubt that this is an extraordinary time to be one of the largest producers of content in the world with the pipelines of content we have. And it's, while Hollywood blockbusters have never been more popular around the world, also pop culture that is increasingly becoming global is resonating all around the world. It's interesting to hear you say that in India, programs about Mexican drug lords and programs like Game of Thrones are really sort of drive at content. We have content that ranges from Law and Order and Mr. Robot, series, to Fast and Furious and Despicable Me and Minions, to the Kardashians, and globally these programs, this type of content resonates, and certainly here in Asia it does. So we're really, really be able to, with I think the proliferation of OTT services and all that is happening now, we're seeing some really important trends that I think speak well to where our strategies lie. One, there has never been a time where people have watched more content. And that's good news if you're a content provider and you have the ability to take a portfolio approach and look at windowing and look at branded services and look at how you're working with the major platforms. But also we're seeing the millennial and the Gen Z viewer who is really watching in a very different way. And again, if you're a content producer and you have the ability to put content around brands or brands around content, you can move into social platforms and into short form content, and you can engage with that audience where they want to spend their time. So across our business, across the region, we're finding there's great opportunity.
Cool. And in terms of, just to get more specific then, I think a lot of your examples were sort of global formats, right, or global brands. What's your prognosis on sort of local production, so to speak? And there's sort of a format version where you take an existing format and you localize it, so to speak, or there's a pure local sort of capability where you come up with local ideas. So what's your prognosis on sort of pure local productions, local stories? Because I think one of the gaps in some ways, my own personal opinion, is sort of the gap between Western cultures and Asian cultures is quite wide, right? So there's only a few genres that travel well into Asia, and I think you outlined a lot of those, right? I think the second question is, what about local content that can travel? Because Asian sensibilities are quite similar, so there may be this notion of remaking or formats within Asia, and also how you take your global formats and localize them. Can you talk a little bit about sort of what you've done in the local space or what you plan to do in the local space?
We, We are working with a lot of the major content producers on formats. So you'll see one of our big broadcast network shows, Suits, in Korea. Saturday Night Live, we were talking about it a little earlier. Saturday Night Live, which is a very famous show out of the States. We are airing the Korean version of that show on E! Entertainment around Asia and in Japan, and it's been just a phenomenal success. We produce content. If you can imagine it, there are real housewives in every market in Asia. There also are families that are famous for being famous, like the Kardashians in every market. We've produced a tremendous show in the Philippines called It Takes Guts to be Gutierrez, which has just been, an enormous success there. So we are producing in all of them. In fact, at the moment, we're producing for our networks in the Philippines, Singapore, Taiwan, and co-producing in Korea. But we also have a division that sells formats successfully around the region. So, we find it's a combination of taking the best of US IP and being able to localize that, and then taking our global brands and creating relevance through local content and through versioning locally.
I see. And how do you see the time frame for some of these opportunities evolve, right? I think there's sort of the immediate need of the hour is to get good global stories here and localize them quickly. And I think over perhaps a slightly longer time frame, you can imagine Asia coming into its own in terms of being an exporter of ideas, taking content from here and sort of growing the IP and expanding it out ex-Asia, right? And that's sort of the dream for a lot of the Asian creators in some sense, right? So do you see sort of that happening in the next 3-4 years? What's your overall sort of approach to how you prioritize across taking global formats and investing in local instead?
Well, the business that I'm involved with is really about building our Asia business, so it's really less about exporting Asia elsewhere. However, I do observe that there's with the enormous Indian diaspora, for instance, there's certainly a big export market, for Indian content and Bollywood. The Korean content that has just been extraordinary, the wave in the last really 10 years, is now, being exported to Europe and all around the region. So there's certainly crossover. Formats coming out of Japan have been very popular in other markets. So there's a continued crossover. I think language is really key, though. The English language just has a broader reach, and so Hollywood content, is really traveling best. For the region that I work in, as I said, we find it a real mix, and that the ability to tap into, to local audiences and to local tastes, and to develop local hosts and local talent, to produce local formats, to produce short-form content that engages audiences and bring them to long-form. There's a number of different strategies that we use to really connect locally while being part of a global, branded business.
Okay, no, that's very cool. I think some of the common themes I'm starting to hear is I think global is still very relevant, at least in terms of perhaps because of the production levels of the stories or sort of the work that goes into sort of behind the scenes to make it real. So just switching topics, and I think we were joking about this. You can't really have a conference these days or a panel without talking about OTT. So I would like to just briefly touch on how you look at the impact of OTT players on content creation specifically, as opposed to sort of disruptions and larger ecosystem views. Because one of the things that the OTT players are starting to do, of course, is create local originals, right? And I think the way they approach originals is quite different from some of the traditional houses. So it'll be good to sort of hear your perspectives on what is the OTT opportunity for content creators, right? And how do you look at it? Are they clients? Are they competition? What is sort of the midterm prognosis for this?
Well, from my perspective, it's leveled the playing field a lot more. I think calling them client might be quite accurate these days, because with theatrical, everybody's your client, and you have to go through many different levels of stakeholders to get into the theatrical business. But with OTT, you just have to sort of please just that one brand to get them to say yes, and you have your film out there. They will deal with their subscribers. They'll deal with how to deliver to their subscribers. But if you deal with theatrical, you have to deal with the exhibitors, the distributors in between, the people doing the marketing, and each one of them will have their own opinion of how it has to go to the people that they are servicing. So I think it makes it easier for content creators to just say, let me just do my damn film and get it to whoever I wanted to go to, instead of listening to all these different voices and going through 5 different levels instead of just 2. So I think that's why you see it's a lot of the new guys, a lot of the TV and film guys that are coming up right now. They're trying to get commissioned a lot more than actually going to investors these days, like us and the theatrical guys, and saying, would you want to invest in my film? Can I show you a financing plan? I can get investment from here. I can get investment from there. They'll just say, how about I just go to a iFlix hook or Netflix, and can you just give me my X amount, and this is what I'll do for you.
I think in a way it also is a difference between perhaps being sort of production for hire and building content franchises that have a long tail. And I think for us the development of IP that we can monetize over an ecosystem over a lifetime really provides the value for shareholders that companies like ours are looking for. And we work really hard at developing an ecosystem around our content, so that where we launch a theatrical release, we're able to window previous seasons of a franchise on our networks and on other platforms. We have a consumer products sort of business that works around that. We can tie in with our theme parks, and that all really creates a virtuous sort of halo around those franchises. And I think that's a really important model that that companies like ours are able to sustain in terms of really creating value for content.
Right. Dhruv?
In last 2 years, we have done strategic alliance with 3 companies, production companies, who, by virtue of those alliances, we have services of premium 7 film directors coming to us. Because of their services, the OTT platforms have approached us with the concepts and also asked us to develop the concepts. With both these cases, we have different kind of structured deals with them. So whether they are client, yes, because we also make films, we need to sell it to them. They are our clients. They are also, they're not competition for sure. We also have a television production company which is producing 2 different series for them. So I would rather take them as a client more than anything else. And let's be honest, our deals are made in a way that it helps them as well as helps us in a long-term format.
How important is, just to probe a little further, I mean, how important is data, right, to some of this, right? Because I think one of the challenges, I think, as you look at creating for digital specifically, right, versus maybe some of the traditional approaches, is arguably the digital players are much more data-driven, and not just around the production cycle, but post-production, they get a lot more engagement data than I think a lot of the traditional cycles provide. How do you tap into those data sets, right? I mean, what is your access to those data sets? How important is that to decide, what you want to be creating, right? And how do you sort of build essentially in-house capabilities to stay ahead of the game, if you will?
I really, I'm not so sure as to, because of our varied businesses and creative content that we do, whether or not we definitely look at data of our films that are doing. So we do look at the kind of business they can do and where is exactly the potential of a film to be commissioned or not commissioned. I'll just give you an example right now without naming the house, the production house or the star. One movie was made with a B-list Hindi film, but since his last 2-3 films have not done well, the production house right now is talking directly to a OTT platform and selling it. So that's the situation. So whether data works, doesn't work, it's subjective, but data has to be collected, and we have to make that as a groundwork to greenlight a project.
I would have to jump in and say data works. It's just a matter of whether you have quality data or not, and what access to data you have, and
That's
what
right.
sort of analytics you can put around your data. But there is no doubt that increasingly in the future, data is absolutely fundamental to the way that we think about our business. It's where we have direct-to-consumer businesses. We have an app that we launched a year ago in Australia called Hey You, which is a female lifestyle sort of reality content app. And that business is driven by the data we get in real-time basis, in terms of the way that we're acquiring subscribers and the way that we're programming for that. In the traditional pay television model, of course, the data, as flawed as it is in Asia, was one that drives programming decisions in our advertising sales business. And I think increasingly in a world where many of us are dealing with business-to-business sort of models, who owns the data and access to data is becoming a really fundamental sort of part of deals that we all negotiate as distributors.
Well, I think that's the analytical data which we can have access to, and I think the bigger companies will have access to because they have the teams to do it, and we can obviously buy and share in that. The other kind of data that's relevant to people like me is the on-ground data, especially in this part of the world where a lot of things can be shrouded in half-truths, especially when it comes to real production budgets and things like that. This only comes from actually being on the ground and producing with the ones you're commissioning now and investing in now. So a lot of what I do is to make sure that production budgets don't balloon, because that affects your ROI at the end of the day, affects your investment quantum at the end of the day, affects the controllability of the projects you're involved in, whether or not it's on a project level or a slate level. We know in different regions, in different countries, what the average cost of certain productions will be and can be for different genres, for different types of production. For me, that's a very key kind of data point that I have to keeping up to date on every few months, because I need to know if a certain company if I'm investing in a certain project, whether that project is overpriced, because that's going to affect knowing whether or not what sort of quality I'm going to get out of that production company, for example, and whether or not I'm going to get a distribution deal out of it at the end of the day. So those are the kind of data points that, for me, it's the most important for me at the moment.
Okay. So, I think it's interesting because I heard a couple of different types of answers here, right? I think we saw a clear acknowledgement of the value of data over time. And except for Christine, I didn't really hear sort of a strong, we must be the best at data in order to win, right? So let me just take a step back and say, as content creators, what is the single sort of biggest advantage or asset that you need to develop to stay competitive in the next 3 years, right? What do you bet on as an organization to be relevant in the content creation space, and how do you go about building those key capabilities?
I'll have a step. That's a big question, Krishnan. What do we bet on to win in the next 3 years? We believe that the portfolio approach is fundamental because the fragmentation of the distribution industry is going to continue for a time, and then potentially there'll be consolidation. But we believe whatever the case is, having brands as pathfinders to get to a place to discover content remains important. So we're really big on brands. We think there's some opportunities in certain genres. We think kids, there's still a tremendous opportunity in this part of the world. Our company acquired the DreamWorks Animation Studio last year, and we've just announced that we're bringing that business in-house and going to be managing our DreamWorks channel in the region, which we're really excited about. We think women are a very big opportunity, and I know that's a big statement, but there is a movement happening in the world where women want to have a voice, and whether it's actresses or audiences, there is a lack of tolerance, I think, from a new female audience for stereotypes and cliched storylines. And so I think that you'll see the empowerment of women as a movement will impact the entertainment industry. We're very close to that because we have some of the most popular female entertainment brands in the region with Diva and E! Entertainment and Bravo. And we're really looking very closely at production and content around that. I could talk for quite a long time about what the opportunities are, but I think they're some of the sort of the buckets that we see and we're focusing on.
Okay, great. Dhruv?
We, as a matter of fact, have had a history of not creative and corporates trying to take a judgment on whether or not this creative decision that we take works or no. We have had more failures than hits, let's be honest. But in last 2 years, we have alliances with the production houses themselves. So we believe in investing directly with the talent and let them do their job, we do our jobs. We do the distribution right, we do the syndication right, but as far as the creative is concerned, invest in them and see how it works. In last 2 years, it's been pretty successful. So we believe that that's the way to go, and we've just done one similar alliance in south of India with a Tamil production company. We already have Phantom, we have Rohit Shetty, we have, I don't know how many people are aware of them, but they're big names in Hindi film industry. And we already have Amblin partners with Steven Spielberg's company, and IM Global in US. So we have all these alliances, and that really works for us. Instead of us trying to say we know the content.
So the idea is you're building a little ecosystem of partners, and together you
Yes, and that really
band
has.
together to create content at scale.
I think that's
right?
a better way to deal with things.
It's interesting.
I think this is the danger of going last because mine is a hybrid of both of them. First off, it's the portfolio strategy, but more about growing that value chain. I think it's very similar to that. From what I said before, we look at everything from the distribution, the production, to the IP. That's very important to us to be able to have our fingers in every single part of that value chain, because you can't have your eyes closed on one. You have to know the whole equation, in this industry. If not, you are too dependent on somebody else to make sure that everything works. So you have to have the whole equation in your head. That's the first thing. And as mentioned before, because we are producers as well, and we're so close in the regional industry to so many filmmakers and content creators. The key, as we see, going forward, production itself is not going to be such a big thing in Southeast Asia. It's production it's all about the talent. It's anybody can have a production company, but it's who you have at your helm that's going to make the big difference. So having that talent close to you, like what Dhruv said, is going to be key. And especially in Southeast Asia, it is about showing more respect and showing more focused on the talent itself, not just the studios that are churning out content in the bigger markets, but the actual talent that they are working with. I think that's the very key fact of the matter. That's where we are going to start focusing on. And the third thing that we're going to do is we've been doing it. Everything that we do is a co-production, so I think we'll just be doubling down on that going forward as well, because that again fits to what Dhruv said about having that good partnership around the world. Co-producing is going to be the key thing that in every facet of what we do is going to be very important as well.
Clearly, it's a risk demitigator as well. I think in that
It's
sense,
de-risking, yeah.
it lets you do more with the same capital that you have.
Just
So.
one more thing. We've had the creative have the financial stake in the company. So they are taking care of their interest.
Okay. Well, I think I just wanted to round it out. It sounds like, as you sort of listen to some of the panelists here, clearly there's no single answer, but I think some of the themes that I sort of heard were, content, invest in content, the right IPs always wins. Invest in talent, keep them close to you. Partners, ecosystem development, so to speak, so you have sort of a sustainable edge to continue to create and to continue to win in the space, right? So interesting times. I'd love to turn the floor over to the audience to see if they have any questions.
This is a great discussion. I spent a lot of years in the games industry, and it strikes me that in gaming, region gating has really fallen away. It existed, but at this point, you can play Candy Crush even if it was developed in Sweden, or you can play Super Mario Brothers even if it was developed in Japan. Do you see in the video content space, can you imagine, and I know for NBC this might be a trickier question, can you imagine region gating falling away completely in the video business? And this really touches on the topic of exporting content, right? If you produce content in India, region gating is one of the things that gets in the way of it being able to be watched by everyone everywhere. Do you think that can change?
Not really, because I was just talking to somebody yesterday, and we have a very popular animation character which was developed by the national television channel, and we've taken the rights for that. And we have sort of given that feelers to a couple of companies, one in Hong Kong and the other in London. We're getting interest in that, but I can't comment whether that's happening or not yet. So yeah, that's under negotiation, but I'm saying, yeah, there is a potential.
But it seems, based on your answer, that there are commercial obstacles, potentially more so than cultural obstacles. I think commonly there's the cultural answer, which is, this may not play well in this region, and yet there are commercial considerations that seem to drive a lot of this.
It will be, because invariably you'll have some kind of cost involved with either their side or my side. So there will be a commercial call on that, and how to price it, how will they monetize it, all this will be subject to a lot of negotiation.
I think at the end of the day, I know it's super annoying because I'm a consumer myself, so it's knowing that some things are available somewhere and some things are not. At the end of the day, it's the game of the bigger studios at the moment. Any worldwide player can get rid of that, but if you're independently distributing any sort of IP or content, you are subject to piecemealing that IP to whichever buyer buys for certain territories at whatever window that's available at the time. So I think, that's going to be a question mark for worldwide big OTT buyers or worldwide big licensors, but I can't imagine that's going to change anytime soon unless someone or a buyer puts a big amount down, or a seller's okay with selling it for an X amount for, The truth of the matter is, you can make more money on multi-territory by piecemealing it than you can on one sale. So sometimes it's also the seller's prerogative not to have that happen.
I don't know, yes?
We've got Hollywood, which leaves its imprint across the world. And do we ever see any content from Asia, or any player, or any thing happening out of Asia, which could do the world, what Hollywood is doing to the world?
Well, I think there's a difference between one-offs and systematic export, right? I think the one-offs are very clearly already there. I think there's been many examples of projects that have traveled globally. The question is, and I think the question you're posing, Anil, is whether there's a systematic way of producing in Asia that can be exported globally. Clearly Asian stories have a place in the world as well. My own take on it is I think there needs to be a step up in terms of production levels, right? Better stories, better scripts, tighter scripts, better acting, better production values. And I think there's some groundwork that needs to be done before it can happen. And I think it's potentially possible. It's really early to say if that's...
I've been hearing this for 15 years from Asia.
But
Listen, I've been hearing this and I'm a little tired.
You have to define what you mean by Asian productions, though. Do you mean Asian faces in the cast? Do you mean...
I'm talking about emerging from Asian stories,
Okay,
Asian talent.
I'll try and answer your question. Way back in 2012-13, I'm talking Indian content would go to something like 20 countries. As of last film in August 2017, we've sent it to 77 countries. I'm not talking monies here, because obviously the actual number might be different. And it will not be the number that Hollywood does. But reaching out is our first way of trying to do the similar thing. Like everybody knows here that a movie like Dangal does $120 million in China.
That's
the starting point, isn't
So
it?
you're saying we are the starting point? It's
Yes.
another 10 years from now we'll be saying that, yes.
Yes.
So, Anil, I think the answer is no. Honestly, I think Hollywood is going to continue to dominate just in terms of the global perspective. You know that. That's why you're asking, right? We've
I'd
been
like that to
friends for a
change.
long
I'd like that really to change.
But I think there's some really exciting sort of individual cases you see. The Ellen DeGeneres show just featured their first K-pop band as entertainment. You know, I mean, there's so much sort of crossover culture. I think Korean is probably where I see it starting to happen first. You know, Bollywood is massive, and so perhaps it doesn't need to export as much. But I really think that it's
You don't think it's going to happen, right? You don't think it's going to happen. That's all I wanted to hear. Well, we just flop around and we start saying, Krishna was doing it, saying, we one-offs. You know it's not going to happen, right? In your opinion?
Well, I mean, these are cultural memes, right? I think consumers follow what's cool, right? So I think...
Who says what America does is cool? Colombian shooting, all the crap that's happening there, elect Donald Trump. I mean, who says that's cool?
I think there's still a place right now. I think across the board, I think Hollywood is considered as the global exporter of content, right? And culture in many ways, and it's very aspirational, right? Sort of a lot of the emerging economies where ARPOs are lifting, and the millennials ape the West, right? And that's just a reality in Asia today, right? So I think over time, it's really a function of whether there's another Asian sensibility that can rise, so to speak, to be cool. And I think global audiences go where things are cool today, right? So I think, so it can happen. I know it's a flat answer, but it is what it is. All right, I think we're running out of time. So one last question, I think we'll wrap.
Actually, my name is John Liu. I come from the Han Picture. I just want to follow his question also. My answer is yes, but take a while, maybe maximum 20 years. The main reason is Asia have very rich history and culture. If we can create good content, use Hollywood technology, we can. Can be very quickly.
I like your optimism more than his.
Christine, not me.
You put it in a place, you had to answer.
All right, so with that, I think we'll wrap the session. I think we are, of course, available for private conversations after this. Thank you so much.